Legendary Tales has now come to Quest, and it's carrying a pretty hefty price tag of $40. And this price for what is considered a indie VR game is especially high for the current Quest market. But 2 years ago, when it originally released on PCVR and PSVR2, it was in fact one of my favourite dungeon crawlers that a lot of players feel, including me, delivers a sort of Souls-like VR experience, borrowing elements like when you get downed, and you will, you have to make your way back to your grave to get your equipment back, which in Legendary Tales is presented as a golden sword that you pull out of the ground. And if you plan things right, you can drop a portal at any time to go back to your starting camp, or at least at the beginning of a new area. And here you can restore your health and mana by resting next to an open fire, and also you can sell equipment, buy lots of stuff, create tons of things. But the main question for today's video is, how does Legendary Tales hold up on the MetaQuest 3? Well, it does a lot of things right, but even after all this time, there's still some things that make it quite difficult to navigate, at least for beginners, and certain things like the climbing, which I always found pretty annoying, are still here after all this time. On a positive note though, Legendary Tales still delivers the same intense physics-based combat via quite a few different single-handed and two-handed weapons, which I feel cater to everyone's playstyle. Now I personally prefer going into battle with a shield and a single-handed weapon, but if I notice my health getting a bit low, I then swap to a two-handed weapon like a spear or a double-headed axe to keep my enemies away. And I've always liked the way you can hold the triggers on the controllers and then reposition your hands freely, so these weapons actually feel like you're holding them the correct way when you fight. It's a small thing that you don't see very often, but it is a nice touch. There's leveling via XP that you can use to improve your character, there's main quests, side quests, pre-designed dungeons avoiding the jank of procedurally generated maps, and you'll also find hidden places that feel like random events. The map is however broken up into different levels of difficulty, so if you're not at that level or anywhere near it, it could be a real challenge, but I've always found there's enough NPCs to kill and quests to do that make all these dungeons pretty approachable as you play the game. One thing I do like is how the levels progress and your enemies actually get harder as the game goes on. And when I say harder, you'll notice them do different moves that you haven't quite seen before. And the mid-level bosses do actually have combos that you need to counter or learn to be able to beat them. There is however quite a difficult learning curve, just learning how to navigate everything in the game, especially when it comes to crafting weapons, making potions, enhancing your weapons and your potions. And even though I have reviewed Legendary Tales before, it did take me quite a while to figure it all out all over again. But if you don't fancy doing that, I did make a 20-minute Legendary Tales beginner's guide, and I'll leave a link to that video in this video's description if by the end of this video you fancy picking it up on Quest 3. And before I forget, there's also 4-player multiplayer that unfortunately I didn't get to test on the MetaQuest because every room I wanted to join had a lock on it, which meant I needed a code. And obviously I get this because players don't want to be interrupted during their adventuring. But I did play this online on PSVR2 and it was actually excellent. So all in all, there's a lot to like about Legendary Tales regardless of what system you play it on. But there is something that bothers me now that didn't really bother me before, and I don't know if that's because more recent games have done a bit of a better job of giving players weapon weight with the physics. Because in Legendary Tales, it's a bit all over the place. A massive sword does indeed feel almost impossible to use single-handedly in a fight, but when you do grab it with both hands, it automatically turns into feeling like a feather, allowing you to easily swing your weapons back and forth, especially the giant hammer. But overall, and most importantly, when it comes to the Quest version, it's almost identical gameplay wise to every other platform. And the Quest version right now at least has a lot of updates yet to come to PCVR and PSVR2. But obviously, why are these updates even staggered? And the developer told me it was to thank Quest owners for buying the game, but personally, I would rather keep the people who already invested in the game just as happy as the people picking it up as new players. And also to note, there is no cross-platform multiplayer, but when I checked yesterday, there was actually lots of people playing online. Now I've told you it's identical gameplay wise, that leaves us with the graphics, and to be completely honest, when I first booted up this game I was pretty underwhelmed. Don't get me wrong, Legendary Tales doesn't wow people visually on any platform, but it's the little things like the gloomy darkness that you miss on Quest, a nice clear draw distance, super shiny weapons, and some reflections, colourful effects and high textures. Also on other platforms, the enemies did have some really cool looking dead zombie type skin, and overall the Quest version is very watered down visually. However, However, after about 45 minutes of progression, which it takes to defeat the first boss, finish your tutorial missions, and you're now used to the mechanics, I found myself pleasantly engrossed all over again, and then sunk another 6 hours into it. And there's certain parts of the levels I found myself thinking, hey, this looks exactly the same as it did last time I played it, which does go against my first impressions. And I've had this many times before. When you play a game that was developed with PCVR and PSVR2 in mind, the more time you spend inside the quest of the game, you kind of accept what you're looking at, and overall the game does look okay, but ultimately I don't think it's even really pushing the quest 3 enough. Some menus have jaggies, some things look a little fuzzy, draw distance is dealt with using grey fog, and it's just not very colourful, which is not how I remember it the first time I played it. Most of us are now seeing the Quest 3 is actually very capable of some good graphics and colours, and I do believe this game could easily run on a Quest 2, and when I asked the developer, he actually confirmed it. But overall, Legendary Tales pulled me in once again, and I was once again heavily invested, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it. And even though it does carry an eye-watering price tag, especially with MetaQuest being mostly filled with free-to-play games, I do recommend it. It's a pretty special indie game that has some excellent combat and offers tons of replayability, especially with multiplayer. If you're looking for a VR game to sink hours into, is fun and has physically rewarding combat, tons of things to unlock and find, Legendary Tales is a game I feel many people will enjoy. Well, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.